Okay, so here we are. We can now start. Please, if someone wants to make some comment or have questions, please. Please tell your name.
Sorry?
Please tell your name and also...
Il mio nome è Vincenzo Panella, sono uno psicologo, specialista in psicoterapia psicoanalitica, lavoro nel servizio pubblico salute mentale adulti.
E dici anche a chi è rivolta la domanda, se è una domanda.
Sono delle osservazioni rivolte alla dottoressa Marchiori, il cui caso mi ha molto colpito. Solo alcune osservazioni, proprio da come lei ha descritto la prima consultazione. Quello che mi è venuto in mente sono alcuni concetti, forse ormai desueti, ma da come lei ha descritto la paziente mi è venuto in mente il pensiero operatorio, no? Di una paziente, come dire, la cui sintomatologia verte per lo più apparentemente su sintomi somatici, e il pensiero operatorio mi porta alla lessitimia. Concetti, ripeto, ormai forse vecchi, però mi sembra anche, come dire, che descrivono abbastanza questa paziente che la lessitimia, rispolverando le mie conoscenze classiche, viene dal greco antico, assenza di parole per le emozioni, che mi sembra anche, come dire, vada anche un po' incontro a quello che si stava dicendo prima, cioè a interrogarsi sul rapporto che ha questa donna non soltanto con la sessualità e con il piacere sessuale, ma più in generale con la dimensione del piacere, delle emozioni. Ok. E infine le ultime due cose, sempre da come lei ha descritto il caso, mi ha molto colpito il termine che lei ha utilizzato. È rimasta colpita, quando entrava questa paziente, dalla montatura importante che lei ha detto, no? Questo mi ha fatto, non dagli occhiali, cioè dalla montatura importante. Questo mi faceva venire in mente, come dire, una paziente che sottolinea, come dire, un aspetto della vista ma artefatto, qualcosa che tiene. Quindi mi chiedevo che cosa vede questa paziente, a che cosa serve la visione per questa paziente, forse a controllare. E infine mi ha molto colpito come lei ha descritto invece un passaggio importante nel lavorare con questa donna. Mi ha molto colpito proprio emotivamente. Lei a un certo punto di fronte al muro ha parlato di una breccia, quindi cominciare una comunicazione un po' più profonda, una breccia attraverso che cosa? Attraverso dei frammenti. Frammenti di cosa? Di sogni. Quindi qualcosa che ha a che fare con un altro tipo di contatto con se stessa, con altri aspetti della mente che hanno a che fare con le emozioni, con l'inconscio, con aspetti molto più profondi, molto più intimi e molto più veri. Tutto qui, grazie.
Molte grazie. Allora abbiamo un intervento subito dietro.
Grazie, mi chiamo Gianfranco Buonfiglio. Volevo fare una domanda molto semplice, aperta agli oratori. Abbiamo parlato PANCSEP, il sistema della ricerca, e mi chiedevo cosa diciamo del sistema del gioco, considerato che il piacere di giocare viene prima del piacere sessuale. Freud diceva tutto è libido, però insomma poi si ruzza, si gioca, e questo anche nella breve presentazione che ha fatto la collega, cioè non sembra che questa abbia giocato da bambina.
Grazie, c'è una domanda subito dietro.
Allora, body-mind, problema irresolubile. Ci sono tante teorie, però rimane un mistero. Ancora un mistero. Difficile che riusciamo mai a risolvere questa cosa, come 1 chilo e 400 grammi di materia gelatinosa possa poi creare e terminare la mente.
Potresti tenere il microfono più vicino?
Sì.
E anche non ci hai
Okay.
detto come ti chiami?
Sì, Maria Felice Pacitto. Allora, sono filosofa della mente, psicologa e psicoterapeuta. Allora, problema body-mind, fondamentale, irresolubile, rimane un mistero. Ci sono tante teorie, ma restiamo sempre lì, tutto sommato, appunto come una materia gelatinosa a 1400 grammi possa determinare la mente, che è immateriale, materialità, immaterialità. Perfetto. Abbiamo parlato di corpo dei pazienti, però Il corpo dell'analista dove? La domanda è questa, non se ne parla quasi mai. Qual è il controtransfert corporeo dell'analista? E quindi ponevo questa cosa. Grazie.
Grazie, allora io direi che intanto Lisa potrebbe rispondere alla prima domanda.
Sì, posso dire proprio 3 cose perché vi ringrazio molto perché avete tutti colti nel segno. Allora, riguardo al collega che ha posto la prima domanda, sì, sono assolutamente d'accordo. Infatti il primo testo che ho riguardato è quello di Joyce McDougall, Eros, Deviazioni del desiderio, dove lei fa tutta un collegamento tra la lessitimia e queste sessualità arcaiche. Quindi è proprio puntualissima la questione e lei dice sì, però questi corpi ci parlano, comunque ci dicono qualcosa, quindi andiamo al di là di questa mancanza di parole e facciamole parlare. Comunque c'è un capitolo veramente che ho quasi imparato a memoria cercando di comprendere meglio il caso. Riguardo al gioco, sì, grazie. Quando avevo scritto l'avrei presa in braccio, poi ho tolto l'ultima frase che era proprio provare a proporle un gioco, un qualcosa che la distraesse e che la contenesse, perché proprio stava, sì, mi veniva in mente invece tutte le descrizioni di Winnicott riguardo a questo gioco che sfocia nella sovraeccitazione e nella impossibilità di contenimento. Quindi l'ultima, quella frasina lì finiva proprio con l'idea di farla giocare, però l'ho tolta perché apre un mondo che riguarda tante cose. Sul corpo dell'analista, certo, anche qui mi sono ho tolto delle cose, però all'inizio proprio la questione del come si sente, come lei si siede in modo così scomodo, mi mette subito proprio fisicamente in difficoltà. Mi sento molto, molto scomoda anch'io, non so se questo intendeva, cioè lei proprio rende l'atmosfera palpabilmente difficile da tollerare anche fisicamente, perché arrivano proprio come lei nei sogni ha queste percezioni, le sembra veramente di andare in queste case dello zainetto, insomma lei descrive proprio delle sensazioni anche fisiche, ma arrivano anche a me come controtransfert proprio queste sensazioni di disagio, di incapacità di gestire delle sensazioni fisiche, per cui poi lei tendenzialmente scoppia a piangere e si arrabbia e crea una situazione anche in me, insomma, di doverla proprio cercare di sopportare e di proporle qualche cosa di diverso.
Bene, io direi di approfondire un momento questo tema del gioco, quindi dare la parola a Saranti se vuole dire qualcosa di più psicoanalitico e poi a Daniela, if Daniela wants to say something about the playing system in according to Panksepp, ok?
Sì, grazie. Direi però qualcosa sul rapporto con la mente, perché lo specifico apporto della psicoanalisi è introdurre il termine psichico. Psichico significa che nel sistema di rappresentazione non abbiamo solo le rappresentazioni mentali, ma anche le rappresentazioni affettive, che noi rappresentiamo con il sentire, con le emozioni. Winnicott ha detto una cosa molto bella: quando il corpo e quando la psiche è dissociata dal corpo, quindi la nostra capacità di rappresentazione è dissociata dal corpo in luogo delle emozioni e delle sensazioni, e sedotta dalla mente, cioè da un pensare senza sentire. Hannah Arendt, in un scritto famoso sulla violenza, ha detto che quando noi pensiamo in assenza dei sentimenti non siamo ragionevoli. La seconda cosa riguarda il gioco. Ora, possiamo dire, e penso che è un'affermazione, è una domanda molto molto interessante, perché qualsiasi cosa noi pensiamo del trauma, il trauma ha a che fare sempre con l'interruzione della capacità di giocare. Il gioco però è erotico, a condizione che noi consideriamo erotico non soltanto come sessualità genitale, ma come sensualità. Il gioco tra il bambino e la madre è in una maniera molto fine, molto interessante, erotico, sensuale e una sensualità complessa con delle trasformazioni, dove la cosa importante è il perdersi e ritrovarsi, il gioco in intesa, dove necessariamente devi seguire l'altro, non puoi tradire l'idioma dell'altro. Il gioco è la cosa più importante della vita, perché anche qui, mentre noi stiamo parlando, qualcosa accade tra di noi se siamo nell'area del gioco, nella possibilità quindi di un'intesa che va al di là delle nostre intenzioni e del nostro discorso lineare, si espande oltre quello che effettivamente diciamo e crea appunto un'intesa che coinvolge tutto il nostro modo di sentire. Questa è la fondamentale, diciamo così, condizione non soltanto, diciamo così, per dirlo in una maniera molto breve, per essere umani. Grazie.
Grazie Sarantis. Do you want to say something about the...
Thank you. About a play system, it's, I don't know, maybe some of you know this paper by Jaak Panksepp, where he was proposing how to treat depression. And he proposed to basically tackle 3 effective systems at the same time. So one, of course, was the panic grief system. He wanted to try buprenorphine, an opioid. He wanted to stimulate with DBS the seeking system. And he wanted to stimulate the play system with a molecule called GLIX13, as far as I remember. GLIX13, as far as I remember. We can check on that just to be accurate, but I think it's that molecule. So yeah, and that's the very interesting thing about depression, that it's not one emotional system that is not working properly, but it's all of them. There's no translation, is there? Oh, you need me to speak lower? Yes, I'll try. Yes, of course. Yep. Like this? Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. Nope. Okay, I'll start speaking again and you can tell me if you need me to modify anything. Yeah? Like this?
He was saying that there's something wrong with the microphone, but I'm not sure because
I don't think so. No. No, and I think it's working. You have to be in the audience to know what's going on. Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. Yeah. Okay, let's hope it... okay, so I'm not too loud now. And you're going to be, okay, stop. Okay. So here's the thing about a play system. It's an instinct.
Ancora? Allora non so come possiamo fare.
It's the
Se il
translation.
microfono non è una questione. L'abbiamo cambiato ora.
We changed it.
So apparently it's not good.
Così si sente bene? Si sente bene così? Con questo? No, Simone, scusa, deve parlare con questo o va bene il microfono portatile? Basta che parla.
Try to get closer.
Okay. Okay, is this all right? It is, okay. I'll try to keep it there. So then what I was saying is that play is an instinct. That means that we have a need to play. Now, what sort of play are we talking about when we talk about it instinctively? It's a primary process emotion. It's just having fun. It really is physical interaction. It's rough and tumble play. It's not symbolic play. So that's a very important distinction. And there are many hypotheses about what play means, but the one that we know is very certain is if you're having fun with someone that is your peer, because if it's not your peer, it's not play, it's going to be fight or something different. Then if you're really playing with someone, you're going to have fun. So the behavioral patterns are always accompanied with laughter, like loud laughter. And it means that two peers are having fun together, which promotes needing to interact with that peer or other peers again, because it's fun to spend time with others. But this is a peer-to-peer interaction. So it means joy, really. So in terms of affect, it means having a good time. So if you can do that, of course, if you have panic grief problems, separation distress problems, as I think is Sarah's case, then that helps a little. And that was Jack's hypothesis on trying to stimulate the play system, that pathway. There are endocannabinoids there and all these motion energy neurotransmitters. And then if you have the seeking system active, then you're looking for peers to have fun with. And translated to the sexual interaction, it has a little bit to do with it. Because if you can play with peers, then you can play sexually with someone, but that's a secondary process. It's not a primary process. It's something you learn from play originally, and then can be associated to another, well, to other basic emotion systems. But that will be in a secondary level. So it will be the learning. So of course we see problems in this patient to play, because we don't know much about her childhood years, because the treatment is very early, in early stages. But my hypothesis is that the problems with the mother and with the father, which are very barely described, scarcely described, I think that she was unable to play. And we have one piece of information, which is the interaction with her sister, who is 2 years younger. And we know that she had a special treatment because she had asthma. And then she had a fixed bed to sleep in, while Sarah didn't. So then it means that she probably didn't have much fun with the sister. And the sister is currently somehow motivating her in her dreams. So I would say there is a problem with the play system. And some authors would say that comes from the panic grief problem. I think it's both the original problem and the panic grief problem, probably.
So just to add something to the second question, when we think about the system that Panksepp describes, we don't have to look at them as separated, because they're all always interacting with each other. So when we think about the seeking system, that the system that drives most also like the play and the lust system, because if that one is shut down, it is hijacked. We cannot get to the play or especially the lust system. So I think you raise a really good point, but it's really the interaction between the systems. And then I have a provocative question, I think, for both of you. So what you said was really interesting about play, but does that mean that a person cannot be playing on his own? And what does that mean for a lonely child? Because if you don't have a brother or a sister, you're kind of forced to find alternative ways. And if you have an absent mother or a father, who are you going to play with? And how this is going to affect you?
Sì, bene, su questo i psicanalisti sì, hanno delle idee abbastanza complesse per ora che le esprimo adeguatamente, ma dico soltanto l'essenziale. Direi che prima di ogni cosa dobbiamo ricordare che la nostra esperienza è un gioco di per sé. E il bambino, fin da quando comincia a respirare, è in gioco con ciò con cui si trova a fare esperienza. E che una cosa fondamentale del gioco è la sorpresa. Quindi noi si nasce dentro un sistema di gioco, un gioco con quello che ci circonda. Il gioco più strutturato e anche il gioco simbolico emerge dopo, e possiamo dire che il simbolismo viene dal gioco. Allora, che cosa fa il bambino solo? Dobbiamo tenere presente che il bambino non è mai solo. Non è mai solo perché non c'è la madre o non c'è un altro fratello. Se il sistema dell'ambiente ha funzionato bene, il bambino si trova in qualche modo anche nell'esigenza di stare solo e di giocare con le sue cose, a sperimentare. E Winnicott diceva, questa è la fondamentale esperienza di essere solo in compagnia dell'altro, perché l'altro, la madre c'è da qualche parte, il bambino non guarda per vederla, sa che esiste. E dico, quanto è fondamentale per noi questa esperienza dell'essere soli in compagnia dell'altro, perché mentre io vi parlo, sono in compagnia vostra e allo stesso modo, al momento, sono nel mio spazio privato. E io in questo momento sono in comunicazione con voi e allo stesso momento, nel mio più profondo, tutt'uno con voi. E da questo spazio così privato, così intimo, che viene ogni cosa originale che io ho da dire, ma questa cosa originale ha naturalmente il bisogno di essere poi espressa nel campo delle relazioni. Non può mancare la relazione, ma non può mancare anche questa dimensione in cui noi siamo un po' soli con noi stessi, nella nostra intimità. Le due cose, l'autointimità, se possiamo dire così, e la relazione si devono sempre trovare tra di loro. Ecco, io mi rendo conto che gli psicanalisti fanno un discorso complesso e quindi poco utile a una schematizzazione, ma tra quello che dici tu e quello che noi diciamo non c'è disaccordo, c'è intesa, solo che dobbiamo essere capaci di costruirla.
Grazie Sarantis. The theme of the system, the theme of the playing system brings about also the theme of creativity, and the impression that Sarah gives is that she's not a very creative person. She seems to be very constrained, I would say. Is it? I don't know if you want to add something, but we have two interventions from the floor and maybe one from the... C'è una domanda?
Oh, we have two questions really complicated, impossible to summarize. One is from Accursi, another one is from Matana. Matana just said he is leading the Italian group of neuroscience and psychoanalysis, and I'm including in this group. He just wanted to say to all of us, he agrees with our President Sarantis in his opinion about neuroscience and psychoanalysis, and he would like to let us know that there is no reductionism between neuroscience and psychoanalysis, and there is no substitution from a model of psychoanalysis and neuroscience. Just this. This is not a question, he just wants to let us know this. First. Second question for Juma. Now, this is a good, yes, Juma. Because it's about passive female sexuality and masochism. Following the model of Laffer about the breakdown in adolescence, do you think this patient is rejecting her mother because of this breakdown in adolescence about masochism and, I don't know why, sexuality, female passivity? È complicata.
Juba has some doubt about how to reply, but she is thinking about it. But is in line with this. She's stating also this in a way. Let's say so. Vagina is a virtual space, okay? And the virtual space has to do with the possibility to accept or refuse also another body. That means another mind. In Juma's opinion, I don't know how much is true, but in any case, it seems that the main conflict of this person is about the possibilities of being what she is, and not still to be able to interact with another mind. She has not been born still, in a way. So she's fighting. And for example, Juma, maybe, would have said, Elisabetta, why did you choose to support her marriage? Because one doubt could be, well, you're just building up a false self and not really listening to something that I will label as a deep hatred for the other, that is a consequence of having been invited by the mothers in her life.
Thank you, Francesco. I think that trying to speak with the audience, which is not only psychoanalytically trained, I think that it would be useful to try to speak instead of a separation between the mind and the body, trying to think to each individual as a unit. Brain, mind, body. If not, it's difficult to understand each other. But anyway, let's now give the word to Bernard. He wants to make an intervention.
Yes, thank you for this clinical material for us this morning. It's very interesting. And as always, the clinical material needs more differentiation from us, because there are several point of view, and it's very interesting for me, it was very interesting to remark that the pain came back today after another pain, if I can say, yesterday, and it's a great reflection. It's my first point, just to introduce the possibility, it's the differentiation between a psychic symptom and the psychosomatic symptom, because we have mixed both, and the brain, of course, and the mind, of course, and the psychic life, of course. So it's the mechanism of conversion, of course. It was created, invented by Freud. It's a concept of Freud, and it's important just to remember, because it allows this differentiation, because it works only in the psychic life, and in a psychosomatic symptom we have no conversion. In a psychic symptom we have the function of conversion, which in particular about pain, because we know it's why the body can lie, because we know that a psychic pain of the childhood can mute and be conversed after the adolescence and during the adult life in bodily pain. So it changes, it can hide itself. The Oedipal mourning in particular are hiding during the life in have pain and aches. It was my first point. The second point, it's about the erotic life, and which needs a very particular and special kind of regression to be installed. It's the sensual regression, because I remember as yesterday that the sexual life is installed in two stages, and the sexuality of the organ can be reach only in a second time after that the sensual life is installed during the childhood and during the latency, and after it needs a very special regression. It seems that Sarah is in great difficulty to follow this, to let herself going in this regression with this sensual regression, and to be able to have this sensual regression, it needs that the narcissistic defense are put aside, and we have to abandon the concerns of the narcissism. And when she told the world, and when she told about to be perfect, she stayed in his own concern with the narcissism, her narcissism, and so it's not possible to have this sensual regression. We have to abandon our narcissism to can tell to the other, I miss you.
Thank you, Bernard. Maybe Jeff, you wanted to say something? You have a microphone there.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to go off in a different direction again. I'll repeat, I'm not a psychoanalyst, so my comments are not going to go towards that. I wanted to make a comment on the potential vulvodynia, which was presented in the case, and within the case, then it was requalified or reclassified as vaginismus. I have a concern about forgetting about that as an important symptom and potential pathology. And the reason for that is that the discomfort that Sarah experiences with her vulva is not provoked. So this is something that she feels all the time. And the specific symptoms are burning and itching. Because we really don't know that much about vulvodynia in terms of diagnosis, and there is no clear pathology that we can say this is present and therefore it's vulvodynia. But one thing that we do understand is that quite frequently there is a mast cell involvement. That is to say, these are cells of the immune system, of the innate immune system, that are activated by B cells. But what they do is they're resident cells of barrier tissues, okay, the mast cells are. So they live, for example, on the barrier tissues like the vulva. And when they're activated, they release histamines. Histamines are the substance that gives you the allergic reaction. They give you the experience of an allergic reaction of itching and burning. So if you've ever had an allergic reaction where you have itching and burning on your skin, this is caused by the histamines that are released by the mast cells that are on that, or that are part of that surface tissue. And because her symptoms of itching and burning are very specific, and they're chronic, they're not related to penetration, because that's another type of vulvodynia is provoked, but this is not provoked, it's always there. That leaves me with a doubt that maybe there is an inflammatory process that involves mast cells. And another side point of this, and so it's not just a psychosomatic symptom, this is something that may have a local inflammatory process going on involving mast cells. One little side component of this also is that I've tried to understand the effects of the immune response on psychology. And there's quite a large literature on that. But as I tried to study that, I always had the question in my mind, how much of my experience of being sick is related to the immune response, and how much is related to the illness itself, the pathology that I'm experiencing, an infection or a virus. And then I took the COVID vaccine. And the COVID vaccine made me very sick for 36 hours. I felt awful, all right? 100% of that is my immune response. There is nothing about that experience of having the vaccine that is an illness. I was not ill. I had RNA injected into me, and every illness experience, my lethargy, my depression, all of the physical and psychological symptoms were caused by a local infection at the injection site that through cytokine signaling to my brain induces this sickness behavior and sickness response. And so we have to also consider that it's not just the itching and the burning of the vulva that may be induced by mast cell activation, but there may also be this inflammatory response signaling to the brain that we're sick, there's something going on that leads to this set of sickness behaviors that can also involve not just physical, but also psychological symptoms.
Thank you, Jeff. This is very interesting what you are saying about the immune response and the inflammatory response. But of course, we know that the immune response is so close to the brain activity, so it's very difficult, and to the mental activity. So it's very difficult again to separate what happens in the brain and in the immune system. I agree with vulvodynia, you have this hyperactivation of the local tissues. I mean, this is absolutely demonstrated. And of course, it is a histamine liberation, excessive liberation. But what do we know? Again, we don't have to think about separate wills. I mean, the local response is linked to what happens in the brain and in the mind of the patient. So I think, again, we have to think to the case of Sarah as a whole and try to understand and to treat her as a whole without separating the different aspects. If not, it will not be possible. And you can see that with previous therapies, things didn't go very well because she changed therapist, she changed several. I wonder, Lisa, if you would like to say something about the antidepressants you gave her.
Dunque lei, Sara, è arrivata in una situazione di emergenza, sicuramente con sintomi depressivi. L'invio era stato alla psichiatra, non alla psicoanalista, quindi la collega aveva... io credo che se ne volesse liberare, detta proprio tra noi, nel senso che sembrava che non ci fosse niente da fare, era molto agitata, molto depressa appunto, e quindi il trattamento con un antidepressivo, ma di quelli insomma molto maneggevoli, però è stato quello che le ha permesso, secondo me, di andarsi a sposare dopo 2 mesi. Con la diminuzione, la regressione proprio della sintomatologia depressiva, ha potuto poi ha potuto chiedere, diciamo, in qualche modo un approccio diciamo di tipo psicoterapico. Però lì io mi sentivo appunto un po' confusa, nel senso che il caso l'ho trovato difficile e pensavo che potevo fare la fine della collega se non riuscivo a provare almeno a mettere insieme le varie cose. Quindi, perché è una paziente dove ci sono sintomi psicosomatici, sicuramente anche sintomi di conversione, non c'è dubbio su questo, c'è anche una patologia misteriosa, perché alla fine è una patologia ancora misteriosa, quindi il provare non basta la psicoanalisi, non basta la riabilitazione del pavimento pelvico, non bastano gli antidepressivi. È una paziente, ne ho avute altre, e fanno molta fatica poi a affrontare tutto, perché dovrebbero fare la riabilitazione, dovrebbero andare dal ginecologo, fare tutta una serie di cose, quindi bisogna anche dare loro lo spazio per poter mettere insieme un percorso che tenga conto di tutti questi aspetti. Basta, questo che...
Thank you, Lisa, for these details. And I would like to ask Hot. Is it correct?
But I wondered if there were still more comments on what Vanna has raised.
Sorry?
I wonder if there's still more comments on the questions that
In the floor. Ci sono altre domande?
No, you can go. Okay. Can I go? Because I'm going in a bit different direction.
Okay.
All right. I prefer to stand. Is that okay? Obviously, Italian is for me foreign language and English is also. And while I was listening, I was torn between listening to the one or the other. So I might have just missed something, and it might be redundant what I'm raising now, because you might have already touched on it sufficiently. But my interest was in one element of your interaction with your patient. And this element is that she told you that she needed, or that she was giving herself, an iron-supplied diet. That caught my interest and my attention. Have you discussed this further here already? I'm asking. No, okay. So I'm safe not to be too boring. When a patient tells you that in a psychoanalytic setting, you might ask yourself, well, does she really have a deficit? And you might be interested in establishing if she does. That would be one approach, that she feels that her body needs something, a substance to strengthen her and make her blood flow better, etc. You might also think about it that she tells you she's lacking something. And the third element, that she's lacking something psychologically, and that this is her way of expressing that she needs something that would give her the idea that it would strengthen her. Then you could also take the perspective that you are her vis-a-vis, and she tells you that she feels she needs something and that she expects you to give her something which could strengthen her, and strengthen her from inside via food. And then you can go further on in your psychoanalytic thinking that it might be that she expects this strengthening kind of food from her mother, or replaced by you in the interaction. Now, what I find myself so interesting with this reflection is that it points to the discussion we're having here. The importance of external reality. Is she really physically lacking something, which might be the case? Or is she expressing on a symbolic level to you that she's lacking something from her mother to strengthen her femininity, to strengthen her as a woman, and strengthen her to respect and integrate her female genitals? So, as a psychoanalyst, we are faced with paying attention to both lines. We should never ignore the physical reality. When somebody comes to me with chronic headache, I always send the patient to a medical doctor to investigate. But as psychoanalysts, we have to be oriented on both lines. And this is difficult, also in terms of timing. When do we address one and when do we address the other? And could it be that if you address the possible reality too soon, you foreclose an investigation of the psychic realm? So I was just relating to you an issue which is captured in a nutshell, if you like, in your conducting this psychoanalysis, in your treatment, but which is in a nutshell representing what we're discussing here on the whole in this dialogue between psychoanalysis and the dealing with the imaginative and the symbolic, and at the same time realizing the necessity to investigate the reality of the physical and the body. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rojo. We have time for just the last question. Herbert?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this presentation. And I just want to come back to both contributions of Moses Egley Laufer of the Adolescent Breakdown and of Juma. Thank you, Juma, for the question of the marriage. Because your presentation made me think on one, I think, very important step in the development of a little girl.
Slowly.
And the development of a little girl. Because I think one important aspect of a little girl is the very early stage where the little girl has to fall in love with its mother. This is, and really to fall in love. Yeah? So this is, and I wonder, I think it's clear from your presentation, but this love couldn't take place between a patient and her mother. And of course, the mother was also a kind of a wall. She couldn't, there was no, let's say, maternal vagina. And I wonder now, this is from a psychoanalytic point of view, whether the physical touch between mother and child was not accompanied by a psychic touch. Yeah. And so, and this is what we are dealing about all this weekend, the connection between somatic aspects and psychic aspects. And I wonder whether perhaps the wish to marry a man was unconsciously the wish to marry the mother. Yeah. So, and the question of Juma is really very important, I think. And of course, this is something which is happening in the transference. But I want to ask, and I will finish with this, whether this could be a very specific point for all these patients, for all these women who are suffering from this vulvodynia, about the question, what is with their psychic love or lacking psychic love for their mothers? This is not something, I think it's not so, let's say, a conversion neurotic symptom. It's more, I think, on a very, very early level of connection between the psychic cathexis of the body. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So to marry the mother or to please the mother, because this patient is also, she's also has the need to please the mother and the grandmother and all the female line of generations. So there is all this problem again. I would say we have now to finish. I don't know, Lisa, if you want to. Scusami?
Sì, we have the people online, so they need not to ask a question because we are at the end, but they want
comments.
to. Yes, okay. No, just three comments, but I think it's important because they're asking to say something. So I think Blas replied to a question about if she is attacking her mother by rejecting her sexual body. I think Blas replied to this, okay? Alfonso, we are okay with this. And then Essel and Irit and Maggie said next July, this July in Tel Aviv, we are going to talk about in the NPSA Congress, annual Congress, we are going to talk about the play system. So I think this is, all of us will be there. So I think this is the right place where we can talk about panic distress and play, the difference between the panic distress and the play and the relationship between the one and the other. And finally, Paola Viziello invited us to go in several conferences in Europe because they are going to talk about genital malformations and the treatment of genital malformation. So she's inviting us to be alerted by this conference in Europe and study more about genital malformation and sexuality. Just this, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosa. So we are about to close our conference. I just want to thank you, all of you, because this effort of making exchange between different disciplines is also very enriching and stimulating, but it's also tiring. So I'm really grateful to each of you for your intervention and for your participation. I want to really dearly thank Barry, who came from New York for our conference, and yesterday made such a wonderful presentation, and as well as Oliver, who also did a fantastic presentation yesterday. I want to thank all our speakers, and now I would like to give the floor to Daniela, who will make some just closing remarks, and then she will present the next the 2024 conference of IPD.
So this is the time to try to come to some conclusions, but I think, I don't know if you share this feeling with me, but when you've been at a good conference, I think that you leave with more questions than when you arrived. So if that happened to you, then this was a good conference. I'm going to share some of my thoughts and questions, and just try to integrate some of the things that we listened to during this weekend, including some of this clinical relevant material we have. So the first thing, I mean, we opened this event talking about the introduction to sex. And I have to say, this is my first question. I think the name of the conference was Sex, Lies, and Neuroscience, wasn't it? We were missing the lies. Yeah, okay. So I was wondering about that. Where are the lies? But yeah, I mean, they're probably everywhere. And I came to some potential answers on that. But so that was my first question. Where are the lies? And I found a few. So the first thing as an introduction, and I think that Claudia in particular did a great job there to give us the context of the conference. Just to say, well, psychoanalysis had to start with sexuality, and then it became probably too much about sexuality, and then we went back to no sexuality at all. So I think this is a great topic for the conference. That was something we need to keep researching, but I believe that the approach is the suitable one, is to work together, just as we just saw. Now we have information from different sources and fields of knowledge, and then we can understand things a lot better. So I think that's one of the first main points. The second one is probably something that came up during this clinical discussion, which is how psychoanalysis started proposing repression as its main mechanism to declare that the unconscious exists. And then we were sort of discussing if this was related to repression and symbols, or if it wasn't, because of the nature of conversive symptoms that you were mentioning, and also the psychosomatic and the differences between them. So I think that is one of the questions that remains that we investigated very punctually, I would say. So there is one sort of silent topic, and I thought of the lies there. Let me tell you why. The Oedipus complex. I thought about the Oedipus complex and fantasy. And I found some lies in Freud's Oedipal complex. Why? Because he skipped some of the generational work there in the Oedipus complex. So apparently it is Oedipus who is this person who is really mean and wants to commit the Oedipal crimes, both of them. But what Freud never talked about, and I think we saw it in this clinical case, is how the first crime is committed by the parents, and then that leads Oedipus to commit crimes. So for one strange reason, Freud forgot to talk about that when he was proposing pathology, and it begins there very sadly with Oedipus' father. So I think that was an important problem, and then also something that we have to research neuroscientifically from my point of view, this difference between people who live ruled by the Oedipus complex and people who don't. And then I think that clinically we will make loads of progress there. So that's another important feature. Now, the topic of the conference, the most important topic, I saw it with Jacques Panksepp's proposal of the loss system. So it's a difficult system somehow, because he always said, I cannot give you enough information. It's different in males and females. It works differently, but we know one thing. there is sexual attraction, and instinctively it promotes reproduction. So then it is something that we need to study, because it's our nature to try to have offspring, and then comes the care system. If you succeed, then you should take care of your offspring. You should take care of your kids. And it's so hard to do in the right way, as we just saw in the clinical case. So this law system, I think, is very important, because what we learned in this conference is that from the neuroscientific data we had and from the psychoanalytic data we had, I think that we're stuck in this second process learnings and associations, and that's one of the hypotheses I'm going to propose to work on some of the questions that came up yesterday. So when I'm talking about secondary process learnings, I'm talking about a bit of what we had in Barry's presentation about excitation coming along with inhibition. So I think that was a very important point, very interesting, and all the correlations that we learned of yesterday, and that they made me think of many things. But I think one of the most important ones in terms of that was what gets associated between those instincts that have to learn from their environment and context, from their relationships, and how that becomes a cognitive idea that then is in this loop from primary to secondary and tertiary processes, and all this top-down regulation. So I think there we probably learned that associations are terribly important to understand what's happening with sexuality. And those associations at the secondary process level tend to be unconscious, which is really interesting. So it came up a bit yesterday, if affects can be unconscious. According to Freud, they can't. According to Jack Panksepp, they can't. Why? There are many reasons, but the first one is that they're meant to be felt. So there cannot be something that you feel that you're not actually feeling, which is different from verbalizing what you're feeling. That's a different process. That's tertiary process. But the primary process is you feel something, and it has to do with the periaqueductal gray at the brainstem. So that means that if we stop feeling, then we couldn't survive. We won't be able to survive if we don't know what we're feeling, what our needs are, and they lead the way in terms of what we're trying to approach, which problems we're trying to solve, which needs we have to meet. And in terms of that, then, it was very interesting to see how so many subcortical regions are involved in sexual response. So then, of course, it's the periaqueductal gray matter of the brain that was highlighted, but also secondary process learning structures, such as the amygdala, the nucleus accumbens, and then I think at the higher level comes the hippocampus. So there's memory and learning about those associations that shape our behavior, but sometimes we're not sure about exactly what prompts an effective response. And that's a psychoanalytic problem. Because we know what we feel, but sometimes we don't know why we're feeling what we're feeling, and then we're unable to solve a problem if we're not clear about what's producing or provoking or stimulating certain affects. So I think that's another very important point. Then comes the problem precisely of pain, which was very interesting. That correlation. Probably opioid-driven mechanisms about pain and pleasure with different opioids, of course. The endogenous opiate system is probably too complex, but that's what makes it very interesting. So thinking about it, Rosa, I think in particular, brought the topic of attachment, which I find very important to the rest of what was discussed. Because it's what we think of the first relationship, the one that shapes the rest of our relationships. Some authors challenge this hypothesis. Some authors, I think most authors, say this is actually the way it goes. So if you have some sort of faulty relationship, like the mother-child relationship, then it's very likely that the rest of your relationships are going to be in trouble. Now, according to affective neuroscience, there are 4 social instincts. So one of them is precisely to attach, which is driven by the panic grief system that Oliver talked about, and of course a mother and hopefully a father that want to take care of a child. So then it's 2 systems there: the need to be taken care of and the need to take care of someone. So those are 2 social instincts. They're present in both males and females, enhanced in females because we're the ones carrying the babies. Then there's the loss system, probably the star of this conference, and you need that to produce the baby. But it's not just for that. I mean, we need to go into the topic of pleasure, which Rosa also did, and libido and drives, which is also very complicated. I have some questions there to share. And the last one is play, that just came up. It had been a silent one, but it's also a social instinct. So it's 4 different types of interaction. It's sexual attraction, it is taking care of others, being taken care of, and I would say last but not least, having fun with others, having fun with peers. So it's 4 different types of interactions instead of only one that was probably the way we saw psychoanalysis for a long time. So this gives some food for mind, I think. And then when we have that, we talked about synchronization and the lack of it. So we know that has important neural mechanisms that Francesco in particular highlighted during his presentation, which I really liked because it leads to the topic of prediction and how much as much as we can predict something, we always have to be ready for the unpredictable because it's everywhere. And the feeling of not being able to predict something makes us feel that we're losing control, which is probably best illustrated by the case presentation. So I think that's a very interesting point as well. But the most interesting point for me, and I briefly discussed it with Oliver yesterday, the nucleus accumbens. Oliver talked about it as part of the seeking system. And he told us it was part of the before neurochemistry of sexual response, which I found very interesting, and I had heard him talk about it before, so I was not surprised. But then in Barry's presentation, what we heard was that it is still active during orgasm and afterwards. So I was that was shocking for me. I hadn't heard that before. And talking to Oliver, I was a bit like, well, that's really interesting. How are we going to discuss this, or what are we going to do about this? And then I came up with 2 hypotheses, probably to guide both research at the lab and clinical research. So the first one is most probably the one that we can test, that the nucleus accumbens, according to Kent Berridge, has an opioid hotspot, which means part of why the seeking system is still being called the reward system of the brain, which is another huge topic. Jack Panksepp used to say there are many reward systems in the brain, not one. But it's still its predominant name. So Kent Berridge says that this opioid hotspot in the nucleus accumbens particularly does bring pleasure when it's activated, which might be one of the hypotheses going on there, that it is, yes, part of the seeking system and the pleasure in seeking, but it can be part of the pleasure in satisfaction. So that's probably the first hypothesis. A little bit more of a risk, which I also discussed with Nikolai Axmacher last summer. that the nucleus accumbens, we know, is a structure that also keeps memory and associations. So it's not just the amygdala keeping associations and then going to the prefrontal cortex, but it is also the nucleus accumbens, but usually related to rewards. That's the way we usually think of the nucleus accumbens. And then what I told Nikolai about this was, I think it may have a role different than only reward. And it can be involved in a very long-lasting type of memory that is not necessarily related to rewards. And well, the good news was he found this interesting, but we don't know. So I think we need to conduct some research on that. And then there's the topic of drive, libido, affect, and instincts. And I'm not sure, this is something that some people are not questioning anymore, because it's become very generalized now to say that there are 7 drives instead of 2. But my question about it is, I know this is 7 basic emotion systems. I know it's 7 instincts. I'm not sure that's an equivalent of drive. And I think when we talk about seeking, it's closer to Freud's libido, but then lost is also very close to Freud's libido. And then Oliver talked about not a panic grief activity, but the opposite, which would mean other type of opioids being released at the experience of satisfaction and pleasure. So I would like to keep that question open. I'm not that sure I would like to call them 7 drives, literally. But I know there's also a problem with the translation about instincts and drives. So then it's a very complex topic, but just wanted to mention it. And the relation to wanting and liking, again, going back to Berridge, and to depression. So probably to sum up some of the pathological issues, the clinical issues, some of the proposals Oliver was just, suggesting yesterday clinically. I think it is an important question to ask what sort of before chemicals or chemistry or subjective feelings someone is having. So that means, like, are you seeking something in particular from sexuality or your sexual response, and what happens afterwards? So I think in terms of that, there's the topic of depression always there. It's always effective neurochemically, and it's probably the way to go if we want to understand that question that Oliver left for us. Like, what are the subjective feelings? Because we know a lot about the response, but we don't know that much about the feelings. So I think that's part of how we can start answering such questions. And last but not least, I think, and I said it briefly in my presentation, affect is probably the bridge concept between neuropsychoanalysis, between neuroscience and psychoanalysis. Because we know the pathways, we know the neurochemistry, but we know it feels like something. So I think that's probably our best candidate to do neuropsychoanalysis, unless we have neurological patients, of course, which is a different way to conduct research. And in terms of that, I think having this conference in this topic, which is sex, basically, I would say it's going back to the start. It's going back to where Freud had to start because of his time, because of how much, like this case, which is so rare in these days, you thought that sexuality was wrong. So then that would be the repressed, something you're not allowed to think of, something you're not allowed to do unless you're a bad person, unless you're married, and so on. And I think it brought us back to the start there. And just to close with the question, like then we talk about sex, then we talk about neuroscience and psychoanalysis, and coming from your presentation, Rosa, what is love then? How many affects are involved in love? And my proposal is probably tertiary affects, not primary at all. Too complex. Well, thank you very much.